My name's Kevin Hendrick. I think I know most everyone in the room in one shape or another. I'm happy to have you here this morning for the Equity with Excellence training to help you run this training at your school. So our purpose this morning is to help you run this training on August 6th at your school site. And I'm going to walk you through, in some modified ways, a number of the activities that you'll be able to carry out. I'm going to go through the resources with you. Certainly answer any questions and make sure that you feel confident doing this when your staff returns to school here in just a few days. You should have 4 handouts when you came in, and we were making additional copies, so if you did not get them, they're still out there. But there's a facilitator's guide. There's a participant's packet. That's the one that has the colorful sheet to start with. There is a single page of a school profile. We ran out of those and made some more, so hopefully you have one. And then there is a single page, just the front of the 5 corners activity. So hopefully you have all 4 of those, and we'll be working through them today. So we're going to be using the facilitator's guide a lot, so you'll want to make sure that you're making notes on there. On the facilitator's guide, we tried to put the slides next to the talking points and the facilitation moves that you'll want to consider. You'll notice as we go through the slides this morning that a few of the slides may be slightly different than what you see here. We may have added a couple words or taken something off. We'll probably do that one more time before we send out the final version, but they're generally the same, and the numbers refer to the slides that are there. So you'll see like slide 8 or slide 10 or what have you. All right? Also in the PowerPoint, when you receive it, most of you are familiar on PowerPoint, there are some notes that can go below. We've tried to paste a lot of the overview and facilitation moves in the notes. I know I've talked to several principals and assistant principals and others who have attended this last week, and they want to add their own things on the notes pages, and you can certainly do that. So when you receive it, and it's your copy, you can update those notes pages, add things as you want to. I know we're scheduled for about 2 hours this morning. We'll probably take about an hour and a half. And we have done this at tables and other places so that there's conversation and some activities, and we're going to just work on that and use this. We do have a board meeting tonight, so we don't want to trash the room, but at the same time, we do want to make sure that we have conversation. So we'll build in some of those. So you're going to start the presentation with your staff by framing it and talking about the idea of equity with excellence for all, and making sure that as a school, we are all on the same page with that and that we understand sort of what that means. So there's 2 objectives, and for those way in the back, I know you're not going to be able to see this, but these 2 objectives are actually not on the facilitator's guide, but they are in the notes. So when you receive the PowerPoint, you'll have them in the notes. If you want, later on, you can come up and take a picture of them to remind you. You'll probably want to post these, just like we ask our teachers to do. You want to constantly refer to them, but it's kind of hard if you put them on the slides, so that's why I just made a poster. So first objective, and those of you who are seated towards the front and those with excellent eyesight in the back, Dr. Hires, your eyesight is fantastic. You're going to read the underlined words. I'm going to read the words that aren't underlined. So, we'll all hear Mr. Hepburn. He'll be reading them nice and loud, all right? And then the rest of us will chime in. Dr. Coffin, she'll be reading it loud as well because she's up front. All right, so here we go. To ensure a common understanding and expectation around equity with excellence for all in PCS and at your school. All right, so you may substitute your school instead of just Pinellas County Schools. So the first purpose of our training, both this morning and when you do this at school, is to ensure that we have a common understanding and a common set of expectations around the definition of equity with excellence for all. And we're going to talk about that definition today. But the purpose of the real number 1 big purpose, make sure everybody's on the same page, right? We want to make sure that everybody's operating from the same sheet of music as we talk about equity with excellence for all. The second objective is to ensure a basic understanding of how PBIS is a framework that will further enhance culturally responsive practices in classrooms. So the second part of the training will be all about PBIS and restorative practices, how they come together, and how they must be culturally responsive in order to be effective. All right, and you'll see that play out over the course of this morning. So after you sort of set the stage with that, you talk a little bit about the objectives and why you're here. You're going to start rolling through the PowerPoint. So the first part of the PowerPoint is really about the Bridging the Gap plan, and it's setting sort of the purpose and the why as to why we're talking about gaps. And while the Bridging the Gap plan is all about gaps with African American students, as you'll see in a few seconds, you might be able to contextualize this to your school and the gaps at your school in any way. So this year, 1920, will be the third year of implementing the Bridging the Gap plan. And for those of you that are very familiar with it, there's a set of strategies for all students in the Bridging the Gap plan, and then there's a set of strategies specifically for African American students in the plan. And one of the things that invariably will come up at your staff, no matter how many times you've done this, somebody will say, why just African American students? How come we're not talking about other students as well? And there's some pretty clear and obvious answers. So one of them is the state and district gaps with African American students are the largest of any subgroup. When you go across data point after data after data after data, ESE's close, we'll get there in a second, but African American students have the largest gaps. The second, we have a board adopted plan, the Bridging the Gap plan. Our school board adopted it in May of 2017, and we have to use it. The third is that we have two memorandum of understanding that have come out of court cases, one of them long-standing, the Bradley case going back to integration days, and the other the Crowley case, which is only about 20 years old or so. But in both ways, we are obligated by the courts to address these gaps. And last, and perhaps most importantly, it's just simply the right thing to do. Anytime we see a student or group of students struggling, we should be pulling them up, regardless of race or color or any other thing that we have. So in this PowerPoint, you have these four little talking points. You may, of course, depending on your school and what you've done, if you've had your school do the African American Heritage Hike in St. Pete and you're really familiar with this, you may have a different conversation, a lot deeper. Other schools, it may be very surface level. But there may be some teachers who want to know more about this. So in the notes section and also over on the side, on the page 2 of your facilitator's guide, you'll see a little link when you receive this electronically. There is a timeline that you can share with your staff that goes through a history of African American integration in our schools in Pinellas County going back to the early 1900s all the way up to the present day. The timeline's about 4 pages long. If you engaged in the podcast this summer around Seeing White, and that podcast that Dr. Corbett facilitated, that timeline was part of the podcast, so you may have seen it already, but you can share it with your staff if they have questions, okay? So you're sort of setting the stage as to why we have Bridging the Gap.
Is that slide that you just showed us, is that part of the PowerPoint, this one?
Yeah, all of this is part of the PowerPoint. Yeah, and this is a good example, thanks Brant, of you'll see the third slide here on page 2. We added 2 bullets. The original one only had 2 bullets. There's 4 bullets on there, all right? So the next slide, and these are a little bit out of order, but you'll catch up here, is just a blank slide around Bridging the Gap to allow you to talk about it. We originally were thinking of having a little video here. We didn't put a video in, but we didn't want to take the slide out because then it would off-number all the rest of the slides, so we just left it in, all right? So you can take it out if you want, but we didn't want to confuse you for the training, okay? So just a high-level overview of Bridging the Gap. If you remember 2 years ago at your school, you kicked off the school year going over the Bridging the Gap plan. You, in fact, shared this exact same slide. There are 6 goal areas: graduation rate, student achievement, advanced coursework, student discipline, ESE identification, and minority hiring. So 6 big goals. And then the next slide shows that as a district, we chart our progress. And I know if you're sitting in the back, you're saying, Kevin, I can't see this. That's perfectly fine, because at your school, the goal is not for folks to become really familiar with this and to become experts in our district data. We want them to become experts in your school data, okay? And we're going to talk about that in a second. But we want our whole school community to know that we track these things. So we have our 6 goal areas here. We have some really high-level metrics. And then we had a baseline year going back to 2016. Then we have 2017, 18, and then our recent data. And so as you talk about this, our suggestion in the guide is that you take one goal area from goals 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you simply contextualize it to your school. And I'll give you a couple of examples, okay? So if I was the principal of an elementary school, I might say, look, at our school in goal 3, we're part of this percentage of students enrolled in gifted courses. In fact, you probably remember we've been doing this universal screening now for gifted for a couple of years. We did it in 2nd grade. Now we did it in 1st grade last year. We're going to do it in 1st grade this year. And as a result of that, you can see in our district, the percentage of black students who are now enrolled in gifted went from 3.8 to 4, then to 5, and now it's at 5.9. So as a district, more students are enrolling, the gap is narrowing, and our school has contributed to the district's goal improvement. Make sense? All right, so we're trying to show teachers and staff that we are part of all of these goals, okay? If I was at a high school, I could certainly use graduation rate and show, look, here we are, we were at 65.5, we went to 76.2 based on last year's graduates. We're rolling through this year's graduates, and in fact, you might even know what your graduation rate for your students are by the time school starts, or you'll be close because you only have a few days left to graduate students. You can also use student achievement. You can use Goal 2, which is FSA Math or FSA Reading, and you can use Goal 4, which is around student discipline. This is a little more difficult because it gets into risk ratios, and that's, statistically, people start asking, well, what's a risk ratio? And you have to explain that, so you can just talk about referrals if you want to. So choose one of the first 4 goals. They work well. The last 2 goals are a little tricky to do with a full staff, so choose one of the first 4, not all of them, all right, but just one, and just send a story about your school and how it connects to the district-wide data, all right? And then you're going to roll to your school results. So one of the handouts that you have is a sample school profile. It looks like this, single page. And so make a note for yourself. This is one of the things that you need to set up ahead of time and prepare for. You'll need to go into school profiles and print this for your school. And Dr. Evans, Dan Evans, will also email it to all the principals, as he always does, and it'll be available this week. So he'll email you this week with it. It'll prompt you to remember, but it'll also be in school profiles by the end of the week. But this is one of the few things that we're not giving you ahead of time. So you need to print this for your staff and make sure that you have it. Please don't take the sample middle school one and print that for your staff, all right? They're going to think you're not prepared, all right? So you're going to have your data, and you're going to talk them through what your data looks like. So you're going to start with the Bridging the Gap section of the data. And so if you go to the BTG side, you're going to notice there's the 6 goal areas, just like I just outlined. And then it has on the center part of the page the district gaps, all right, that I just shared. And then on the right side of the page, it's going to have your specific school gaps. So what are the gaps for your school? So you'll notice this middle school one has high school readiness because they don't have a graduation rate, so there's a high school readiness metric. And the same thing is there for elementary. There's a middle school readiness metric. And essentially it's how many kids are leaving with a 2 or above on FSA, okay? So you'll kind of walk your school through making sure they understand the data in front of them, and they're going to get a chance to process it in a second, but you want to explain what's there, okay? And then on the back side is the ESSA data, Every Student Succeeds Act, right? And so anybody who's worked on the school improvement plan in the last 2 weeks is probably pretty familiar with the ESSA data because you have to include it in there. But I want to just kind of state again what the ESSA data represents because sometimes it may not be clear. So the ESSA data represents if we took one specific subgroup from your school and we only calculated your school grade on that subgroup, the results in the column are what the results would be for that subgroup. So looking at this sample middle school, let's take the students with disabilities. All right, so you go way over SWD, second to last column. So at this particular school, if we only use students with disabilities, they would have earned a 20% school grade. Okay, so the whole school got 46%, which is a C, right? 41 and below is or 40 and below is a D. But the students with disabilities would have earned a 20. And then if you go below there, you'll notice how they did in each of the areas that make up the school grade. So 9% in ELA proficiency, 24% in gains, et cetera, going all the way down. All right? So I use students with disabilities on purpose to show you that as you're using this data set with your school, your gaps may not just be African American students. In fact, if you are at Campbell Park, which is almost entirely African American, you're not going to have some of the other subgroups, and you're talking about one whole group of students. And if you're at, say, Brooker Creek, you may not have an African American subgroup. All right? You have to have so many in the cell in order to calculate that. So, but anywhere on your data, you're going to find a group that has a gap, right? So whether it's African American students, ESE students, EL, whatever that might be. So this particular part allows your school to look at that and look at all gaps, all right? So we started by talking about the Bridging the Gap plan, but now we're sort of moving that towards who are all the groups of students in our school with gaps. So your teachers and staff are going to do two things. First, by themselves, they're going to answer this question. How is our school and our students progressing after 2 years of BTG implementation? And so by themselves, they're going to take a look and they're going to make some notes. Well, it looks like we're doing okay in this area. Doesn't look like we're doing so hot over here. Maybe I have a question. I'm not really sure what that means. Whatever that is, right? So they're going to take some notes. Then they're going to do the same thing on the ESSA side. And then you're going to ask them what subgroups need the most supports and in what area. Okay? So they may say, for this particular example, well, it's, students with disabilities certainly need a lot of support. In what areas? Well, it looks like every area, right? But there's other groups, Hispanic students, black students, that are also below that magic 41. Remember, 41 and above is a C. Anything below that is a D or an F. And for those in the school improvement plan mindset, remember you have to have a goal in your school improvement plan if a subgroup is below 41. Okay? So you're going to ask them to do that individually, and then the facilitator's guide calls for you to have them turn and talk and share what they notice. Okay? So they'll turn and talk, they'll share what they notice. You'll kind of figure out as a facilitator how much time do I need to spend on that. But the whole portion of this part of it is geared for about 20 minutes. All right? Certainly you can extend it if you want to for your school. So as those conversations begin to wrap up, you then can decide if you want to have share out or if you don't want to have share out. All right? And that's really school by school. The positive thing about having things shared out is that you can clarify any questions that people have or misconceptions. But the reason it's sort of optional is I would guess at some other point in preschool, you're going to talk about your school improvement plan and you're going to talk about specific data and things that you're doing and plans and things like that. And now's not the time to roll into all of that. All right? So you can share out now if you want a little bit. Certainly as a facilitator, you walk around, you listen in. If you hear some common themes, you might state them. But you may want to actually get into the details of this some other time in preschool. Okay? So kind of a high-level overview. So that's going to end this first portion, which is the sort of BTG and subgroup gaps. So I want you to talk to the people next to you. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. What do you think of it? What questions do you have? What are the things swirling in your head? 3 minutes. Go ahead. Yeah.
We don't have data because of what we do in alternative.
So you have subgroup data
Some, but go ahead and ask your questions.
on ESSA?
Well, yeah, we got it on ESSA.
Yeah. So if your BTG profile is sort of incomplete because you don't have enough students in some cells or the data just doesn't match up, I would just use your ESSA data because I know you have ESSA data.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, all 18 of our alternative sites and centers and everybody have scores. Now, you may not have an EL subgroup or you may not have some subgroups, but that's the case with all schools. There's a lot of schools.
Dan's going to send us the same thing, right?
Yeah.
That's I've been
Yep.
talking about.
Yeah, you'll get that, but you should have the data now, just not in this pretty format. Yeah, but you have the data of how your groups did.
It's
Yeah.
great.
Good.
And we're going to get the numerator and denominator
Yep.
out as well.
Yep.
That's first.
Yeah, yeah, because it's helpful to see how many students are in there.
Yeah.
Good point. Thanks. Brett?
I don't have a discussion of get your thoughts on it. So you mentioned presenting this on the 6th.
Yeah, you can do it any day you want.
Okay. We kind of were building in some school improvement plan and some specific data conversations first.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
bring in some.
You can do it any day you want. I'm actually going to talk about that at the end. And you can even chunk this, if you wanted to do just this part on that first day and you wanted to do the rest later on, you can do that. As long as it gets done in preschool, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure.
Harris.
Yes.
We don't get all this.
So you do have ESSA data, and Dan will produce this for you this year.
Okay.
All right, and you do have ESSA data. It exists. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, it exists. All 18 of our ESE, alternative and ESE centers have that data. It's on the spreadsheet that Octavio sent out. You might have to search to find it. It's on one of the tabs, but it's there.
Okay, so he will send this to you. Okay.
I don't know about the DOP school, but the rest of
We
them.
have an EAS one, but all our different facilities have different ones.
Correct. Anybody with a school number? All right, now our adult centers will not have this.
Can we make our own?
You certainly can.
Because we certainly have a gap to do
Yeah.
there, so we would do like adult basic education.
That'd be perfect.
I'm Brenda.
Yeah,
Hi.
I've met you before. Dixie and Clearview.
Bridget O'Donnell's our coordinator. How are you?
Hi, good. I know this guy, and I know that young lady. All right, yeah.
So we can
You-
make our own?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because we have a gap with the bridge. We just got to figure it out together.
Okay. Yeah, you absolutely can. Okay. Yeah.
I have school profiles up. Where would this document
So
be?
it'll be up here. It's not there yet, but it will be. And then go to Documents. And it's going to be one of these here. Scroll down a little bit. So he pulled it last year's out because he's going to put this year's in. So it'll be in there.
Okay, it'll
All right.
say ESSA on it?
It'll say school profile
It'll
probably.
just say school profile?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, did you just reference Reuben Hepburn?
He's right there.
Oh, I was going to say.
Yeah. All right, let me bring us back together. So a couple of common questions after the Hepburn reunion up here. I know. We hugged earlier, don't worry. All right, couple of common questions. First thing, something that's really useful on this ESSA document that someone pointed out, and I want to make sure everybody sees that, is the bottom set of data shows how many students are in the numerator and denominator. And that's very helpful sometimes for schools to kind of say, well, how many students do we actually have that are EL, and how quickly can we affect that? Because if we only have 22 students in the whole subgroup, right, then we can quickly identify those students, give interventions, and support, right? So that's very helpful there on the bottom, particularly when you're looking at the L25, right? I see a number of folks in here with elementary schools that have about 300, 400 students, right? Their L25 is like 22 kids, okay? A middle school, your L25 is like 300. A high school, you know, a couple hundred depending on it. So you take the good with the bad, but you'll see that data. Another question that came was EAS schools and ESE sites. Any school with a school number has ESSA data. Any school with a school number has ESSA data, including my favorite one that I can never pronounce, Enanahasi, whatever that is, all right, is a camp that we run somewhere across the state. They have ESSA data, right? I guess we run it here. But anyway, anybody with a school number has ESSA data. Somebody else asked, because I mentioned this at the start, on August 6th, do we have to do this on August 6th? The answer is no. You have to do it in preschool. But if you had, you know, some wonderful thing going in the morning and you didn't want to start with this, that's perfectly fine. All right, you can choose to do it, and in fact, you can even chunk this if you want to do it in a couple different parts, and you'll see why that might be appropriate in a few minutes. Okay. Any other thoughts on the subgroup data, the BTG part?
Real quick, with the ESSA data, is concordancy rolled into that overall, or is it just the state assessment?
Is concordancy rolled in? No, it's not, because that's not part of the school grade data. For EAS sites, it can be, but I don't believe it is in the ESSA data. Yeah.
Will the English language proficiency be included in the ESSA data for the ELSA group?
Good question, Dr. Crotch. Yes. All right. Will the English language proficiency be included in the EL subgroup? Yes. So as you know, one of the big differences between school grade and ESSA data is the inclusion of the English language proficiency score that students take on the access test. So that data, their gains and proficiency, is included in the EL subgroup. All right. So that ends part one. So we're going to move on to part two, which is about aligning this vision of equity with excellence for all. So I want you to go to your participant handout. And when I call it participant handout, we are providing for you, for every teacher at your school, this packet. Okay? So you'll get the color front sheet and the rest of the sheets that go with it. Most of you picked those up yesterday at the end of the superintendent's presentation. If you didn't, we have your packets here with your school name on them and your lapel pins that go along with that. Okay? So principals in the room, remember on May 31st, we did an activity with them. Dr. Corbett led it around equity with excellence for all. And many of the principals said, I want to do that same activity to kick this off with my staff. All right? So that's what you're going to see coming up here is the same activity. So in the facilitator's guide, you'll notice on page 5, nope, not page 5, page 4, you will see way out to the right, poll everywhere. All right, that's what we used to do this. When we did it on May 31st, we used the platform called Poll Everywhere. That would require you to set up an account. It's free, and then people can use Poll Everywhere. You can also use Nearpod. I saw somebody else use Nearpod. You can also do the low-tech version, which is sticky notes. All right? So it's up to you. If you want to do high-tech, you can do that. There's probably a million other platforms you can use. Or you can do low-tech, which is sticky notes. High-tech, a little bit quicker, and you don't have to do all the calculating. So what we start with in this particular part to set this common understanding and expectation of equity with excellence for all is we ask all the staff to, in 5 words, describe our school and Pinellas County Schools' efforts to improve cultural competence and equity. All right? And so you're going to ask your folks to do that through the Poll Everywhere. So if you use Poll Everywhere, you're going to say text this to that, and once they get the little thing back, they put in the 5 words. All right? Principals all remember doing that back in May. And then as those words go in, it's compiling those, and you'll get a quick reflection and representation of what those things are. Couple caveats. If you hand out the participant packet first, all the staff is going to look at the participant packet, and they're going to want to be good students and please you, and so they're going to try to find 5 words from that packet to put in the phone. All right? So my suggestion is you don't pass out the packet first. All right? You do this activity first, and then you pass out the packet. Okay? One difference between when we did this with the principals in May is we did not do the Bridging the Gap part first. So you may get a little bit of some words from Bridging the Gap and ESSA and subgroups and things like that. Who knows? All right? But you may see that come through. We didn't do that with principals. We just did it sort of blind walking in. So you set that up, and you have folks go through it, and then you're going to show the results. So this will require you to get out of the PowerPoint, go to the website, show the results. And it looks just like a Wordle. We've all seen those before. So if you're doing the low-tech version of this, which is with sticky notes, someone's going to have to take all those sticky notes, quickly put them into groups so that we can kind of see which words are mentioned more than others. Or you could have somebody who types really fast type them into the Wordle, right? And type in 1,000 words very quickly and have that pop up. All right? A couple other thoughts just around whether you use Poll Everywhere or Wordle or some other platform. Just make sure that you have enough free responses in that thing that you're using. So if I'm at Gibbs and I have 120 members on my staff, but the Poll Everywhere only allows me to do 50 for free, that's not going to work, all right? Because 70 responses aren't going to be counted. I think, Jen, it allows you up to 100 or more. I think it's 100. And honestly, if you had 108, I would just kind of roll with it. Nobody will know. But if you have 300 people, don't just do 100. Okay? So you're going to show your Wordle and kind of get a visual representation of what do we think we mean when we talk about our efforts to improve cultural competence and equity. And we'll see what it looks like. When we did this with the principals, we saw a lot of description words, a lot of philosophy. We didn't see programs. We didn't see specific initiatives. We saw sort of more description of what we think it means, sort of more from the heart as opposed to specific initiatives. So you'll show that, and then you'll ask your staff once you show it, what surprises you about the responses, and are the efforts in our school, in our district, clear? And if so, in what ways? Okay? So you'll prompt them with this. You might want to go back to the Wordle as they have the discussion, right? Because they're going to want to look at it and kind of see what it is that surprises them, and also if it's clear or not clear. Okay, so they'll have that discussion. And again, you'll notice on here, there's going to be several times that it's sort of up to you if you want to share out. This is one of the times that I wouldn't share out because you're going to bring clarity over the next couple minutes in the activities that you do. So then you're going to pass out the packet. Going back and forth here, but you've got the participant packet. And you're going to talk about how Pinellas County Schools is attempting to meet this objective with every school in being clear in our understanding of equity with excellence for all and making sure that our expectations are clear. So on a high level, you'll start by saying, hey, we have a district strategic plan, we have a vision and a mission, and we have core values. And one of those core values is cultural competence. And these bullets beneath cultural competence are what's in our district strategic plan about how we value cultural competence and what we believe. And then underneath that, we have a section that says equity. In every building, school and classroom stakeholders experience, and you can roll through those or you can have people read them silently to themselves. Then the bottom colorful box there says through the implementation of a number of cohesive practices, equity champions, restorative practices, PBIS. And so we're making this connection of we have this core value of cultural competence, and this is how we try to instill it across our school district and across our school. And that leads us down to this definition of equity with excellence for all. And so on the bottom, I would start out by reading it. Skipping forward here. And so I'm going to read it to you. The academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of each and every student are known and met. And then I would have the staff read it back to me. Let's all say it together. The academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of each and every student are known and met. So as we get a common understanding of what equity with excellence for all is in our district, it relies around academic, social, emotional, behavioral, that the needs are first known, they're identified, and then we meet them. Okay? And so we get to the next slide, which is really rhetorical. It says in the facilitator's guide, so how do we ensure the intent and outcome of all these efforts lead to this success? And so we do it through this idea of a delivery chain. All right? And so we have this little delivery chain up here. And I think this is one of only 2 slides in which there's animation in the PowerPoint. So we start with the district. Right? The district has a role and responsibility and a set of expectations when it comes to equity with excellence for all. We have to first make sure we have a clear vision. We have to second provide resources. Those resources include training. They include stipends for teachers. They include experts, the people who can lead those things. And you kind of give some examples of the district. And I listed those for you in the facilitator's guide. Then we have our school, right? Our school has a set of expectations. And those expectations include things like making sure we follow through on the things we're asked to do as it relates to whether it's training or policy, procedure, whatever those things are, right? Looking at our data, all those things. And so specifically, the school is made up of different groups. And so we have the principal and administrators. And so on the back here, you're going to direct your staff to start to take a look at the different expectations of each group that makes up this delivery chain that it will eventually get down to students. And so it says principal, but it's really applicable to any administrator in the building. You'll walk your staff through the organization of this document. So it's really in 3 columns, starting with equity mindset. In the middle is culturally relevant teaching. And on the end is PBIS and restorative practices. And in fact, those gears on the previous slide show how they work in concert with another. So one by itself is not enough to achieve equity with excellence for all. They all have to work together in concert in order for this to play out in the right way. And so we have a set of expectations in each area. So what is expected of school administrators? So the principals, remember when we did this with you, you actually took time and read through them. You circled ones that you felt you were doing well. You kind of highlighted others that maybe, hey, I need some guidance on that. In this particular case, you just want to share with your staff, look, I'm going to be explaining some expectations of you, but I want you to know that there's expectations of me. And so for example, and then you fill in the example, all right? I have an expectation to become an equity champion. And there's some principals, about 20 or 30 that already have, and the rest will become equity champions this school year. All right, so you can share, hey, I've got to do things as well, And this is part of what I'm doing, is I'm becoming an equity champion so that I can open up my mind to make this happen at our school. Then you go to the school-based leadership team. What are some expectations of the school-based leadership team? One of the expectations, and you can fill it in, is that we ground our data conversations in looking at disaggregated data for all ESSA categories. That we are constantly looking for any student who has a gap, or students, groups of students, and that's something that we have to do. All right, so you give an example from there. Then you're going to get to school-based experts. And here you're going to highlight and celebrate the teachers in your school who have already become experts in some of these buckets. So you're going to fill in the names of your equity champions. If you don't know who your equity champions are, who can you email? Hillary Van Dyke, right? If you don't know who your equity champions are, email Hillary. You're also going to highlight the folks that are AVID culturally relevant teaching trained. We've been doing that now. This is our third summer of doing it. We have almost 2,000 teachers who are trained across the district, and so you're going to list those in. You may need an additional slide. We have some schools that have 30, 40 teachers. Put all their names up there. I would have them stand up. I would celebrate them. Maybe even have somebody speak for 30 seconds about that particular training or what they've learned from it, or something that maybe you're previewing for later in preschool. Hey, later this week, I'm going to host just a 30-minute session on what it means to be an equity champion. If you want to learn about it, come by my room. This is the time. Okay? So you'll do that. By the way, on Monday, this coming Monday, Judy Vigu will email out to principals the list of all the teachers that have gone to training. We have training going on this week, and so it'll finish, I think, on Thursday or Friday, and so she'll send that list out. So you don't need to email her, because every principal in the district would email her. We'll just send the list out, and you can find your teachers who went this summer and those who went in the past. Then you'll have your restorative practices trainer or trainers. You'll list their names there. Again, celebrate the fact that these folks have taken on this responsibility. You can reference back to what you did at the start of school last year or other activities that you did. And then lastly, your PBIS coordinator. And on here, under school-based leadership team, one of the things it says is you must designate a PBIS coordinator. It defaults to which person? The assistant principal, all right? But if you would rather have someone else in your school do it, you can certainly set that up. That person can stand up and say, hey, I'm the PBIS coordinator. You're going to hear more about PBIS in just a few minutes. So you share those school-based experts, and you can see the responsibilities there. Hopefully they will have highlighted those as you talk about them. Now, this is area number 2 where you need to do some preparation. If you roll out this slideshow and you show insert name here, that's going to be very embarrassing, all right? And people are going to think your head's not in it, right? Your head and your heart are not there. So make sure you update the slideshow. Okay, so that takes us to teachers, all right? So what are the expectations and understandings of this common understanding and the expectations for teachers? And so just like the groups above it, we see it with teachers. And now you're going to ask the teachers to go through and circle, of the 6 bullets there, which of the bullets are they already doing in their classroom, and just have them reflect on it silently. So they're going to go through, oh, I'm doing that, I've done this, I haven't done that one yet, and just ask them to circle it. Okay? After they've done that, you're going to ask them to turn and talk and share what things have you done, what things have I done, and give them a few minutes to debrief that particular section. Okay?
I think this would be a good time to go ahead and put a plug in for PD training, especially as it relates to AVID culturally relevant training, or any training regarding PBIS.
Yep.
We have.
Yeah, good point. So Mr. Hepburn says it would be a good time once this discussion is wrapping up of saying, and here's the opportunities for you to engage in these trainings this year. We'll make sure that gets sent out with all the rest of the materials. Okay, good point. And yes, we have them lined up already. All right. So you give teachers a chance to do that, and it's important that while that's happening, you're walking around and you're listening, all right? And you want to look. So if you remember the principals in the room, I was looking and walking around when you guys were doing this same activity, and I wanted to see what you were circling. And what you were doing is exactly what I suspect your teachers will do, and that is you'll circle a lot of things, because we all have high impressions of our own work, right? So you're going to see a lot of circles. I saw it with principals. You're going to see it with teachers. And in fact, most of the things on the sheet are things that you would expect anyway, right? And so as you bring the group back together, you're going to make sure you emphasize, look, as I walked around, if this is indeed the case, I noticed a lot of things circled. So that's good. We're well on our way to equity with excellence for all. But if we're going to do it right and we're going to meet the needs of each and every student, we're going to identify those needs and then meet them, we've got to go deeper, we've got to go faster, we've got to be more intentional in our work. Okay? So you want to make sure you look and see. You don't want to stand up front and say, oh, as I walked around. Well, if you didn't walk around, right, how do they know? So make sure you walk around, take a look. There may be some areas in which there are some obvious blanks, and that might be something you can reference. Okay? So if school-based staff and teachers meet these 6 expectations, and the groups above them meet those expectations, all together in concert, we get to this idea of, and we're going to say it together, the academic, social, we're going to say it together. Probably want to see it before school starts, so I can do the things in my room that roll along with this. One other caveat for this, it's called a self-audit. That is AVID's tool that we've borrowed and adopted with permission. The word audit sometimes can have a negative connotation. There's no audit in terms of, hey, we're taking this and including it in some way, but that's just the name of the word. I'll tell you, in the first 2 sessions that I've done of this with other schools, a couple of schools have gotten really excited and aggressive about this. Their team has already met. One school said they made this into a Microsoft form, and so teachers can just go in and do their own little self thing, and they put it right in the form, and it calculates into school-wide data. And so every time a teacher does it, or if they do it together, like if I'm going to do Mr. Hepburn's room and he's going to do my room, we just mark it and then we enter the data. They don't put teacher names on it, they just do it so that they have the data.
Can we send out that form and then we can just adapt it?
Sure, I will ask that school. Yeah, we can.
Awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you. Perfect for our AVID coordinators.
Yes, good. So we'll do that. So up to you how you want to use this, but I suspect people want to know. Brent?
Is it okay if I back up the bus for a second?
Yeah.
So is all of this equity with excellence for all, is this going to appear to a lot of teachers that this is a new thing? I'm just trying to anticipate.
Yeah. So parts of it, I would say, are going to appear new. This document, if you've not been to the AVID CRT training, would look to be new, but it's just a tool to help engage in equity with excellence for all. It's a tool to help engage your classroom in CRT.
Kevin, I'm not being very clear. In other words, is this phrase, is this mantra, is this going to appear to some people to be like just another new initiative?
Sure. I would say back to you, no, because it's been in our district strategic plan for at least 4 years. It's goal 4 in our district strategic plan. And if you look specifically at the 3 buckets there, these things have been going on. So if you ask somebody, is restorative practices new at our school? No, right? If you ask somebody, is PBIS new? It shouldn't be. It may not have been as fruitful as we want.
Yeah, I'm not asking a question to make a statement.
Yeah.
I'm actually asking to try and anticipate what I feel some of my colleagues might ask. The second question is when we're doing this activity where they look at the 6 bullets for teachers and staff and the things they're doing, as licensed trainers for restorative practice, what's the point of having them reflect on this? Is there another step towards meeting the needs of people who might say, you know what, I really don't still know much about restorative practice.
Yeah.
I really still don't feel comfortable. I'm not doing much of this.
That's the second part of, that's the second goal.
Okay,
Yeah. Yep. Good questions. And in fact, that takes us to, once you wrap that part up, takes us to a video. So I'm going to share this video real quick. It is not the final version of the video. The final version will be sent out, but there's a couple little updates that'll be done. Those of you that were at the leadership meeting yesterday with Dr. Grego, you saw a little bit of this.
Support me.
Show me the why.
Teach me. I am more than just a grade.
Push me. Expect me to be great.
And I will be excellent.
Care about me. It means more to me than you'll ever know.
Get to know me. I am so much more than you see in your classroom every day.
Work with me.
A little extra time goes a long way.
And my ability to understand.
Believe in me.
I may need a different direction.
Sometimes what is seen as failure is the opportunity to begin again.
Don't give up on me. I need to know you believe in me.
So I believe in myself.
Be proud of me.
My voice is important, and I must have the confidence to use it. See me.
See me.
See me.
See me.
See all of me.
Here at Pinellas County Schools, we are continuously working to better ourselves for our students. We are focused on equity with excellence for all. That means that the academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of each and every student are known and met, no matter what school or zip code. That teachers will create a learning environment where all students feel they belong and are welcomed. Continuously reflecting on and improving personal teaching practices used to meet the needs of each and every student. Staff will attend AVID culturally relevant teaching training, implement, and continuously improve upon CRT strategies. And will use AVID culturally relevant teaching classroom audits and self-reflections to support classroom practices and student outcomes. Teachers and administrators will actively display, reteach, and implement school-wide Tier 1 practices and strategies. And conduct and continuously improve on restorative practice on a daily basis. These are the steps we must take to ensure that the academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of each and every student are known and met, and that all students have the resources to turn their dreams into reality. Equity with excellence for all. That is our vision, our challenge, and our responsibility.
All right, so that wraps up this section. So I want you to take 3 minutes, talk to the folks that you're here with. What questions do you still have about this section on equity with excellence for all? What things do you need to do to get prepared? And then we'll bring back together and share those questions. 3 minutes, go ahead. doing all right back here?
Doing good.
You're good.
Maybe do a survey check for okay.
Dr. Harris?
Your mic not working.
It's not working?
No, but they can't change it because of the school board meeting. But they'll be able to pick it up.
Okay. Yeah.
Where are we as far as time frame? I know that first section was 20 minutes. Now
This section should be about 30.
30 minutes, okay.
Yeah, so you should be about an hour in, 50 minutes to an hour.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, let me bring us back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Couple important points that I did not bring out. I can't believe I didn't, but it is in the facilitator's guide. But if I roll all the way back to the start, this is designed, this part here, starting here, all the way through this discussion, is designed to be done in a circle. All right? And the principals who did this on May 31st, remember that. So you physically bring everyone up with their phone, if that's how you're doing it, or with a sticky note, and you stand in a circle, and we did it with 100 people probably. It was large, okay? And we put in our answers, then it was projected on the screen, and then we turned and talked with someone about these, and then the facilitator in the circle asked for a share out of about 3 or 4 different things. We didn't do the whole thing. There was a talking piece, I remember, but you can't have everybody share out because there's just too many people. So in your school, you could do that in multiple circles. That's possible. All right, we're going to talk about that for some other activities in a second, but this is designed to do that. The other part that I didn't sum up with the video, a couple people asked, is where should we be in terms of timing? So if you add up the minutes on the facilitator guide to get to this point for the Equity with Excellence for All, I think it's 28 minutes, so let's just say 30. So take the 20 to start, the 30 here, you should be about 50 minutes to an hour in. All right? So if you're rolling along and you look up and your 3 hours is up, you messed up somewhere. All right? You messed up somewhere. But as I'll repeat in the end, this, you have to do the slides, but you can make it your own. All right? You can certainly tailor it to the needs of your site. What Adult Ed does is going to be different than what Pinellas Park High does. All right? And it should, because the needs and the ESSA subgroups and all those other things are different. Right? But the idea of Equity with Excellence for All from a district strategic plan applies to everybody regardless of setting. Okay? Questions about this particular section? Things that would apply, others would want to hear, good ideas. Brett?
Just kind of a general question, and I'm kind of going back and forth. Our initial thought was to break up our groups into smaller groups and have each person, which I like that a lot, but I also like, me being the lead on presenting it as well.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that as we finish today about, who should be the person doing this work. One answer is you cannot request someone from the district to come out and do it, right? The school is going to do this, okay? Yes, we're recording it, but it's not so that you can show it, all right? So it's simply for anybody who may have missed it. The principal needs to be deeply involved, and I think this particular part, when you're talking about setting the stage, is really important for the principal to be there. If the principal's disengaged, in any training ever, but particularly in this part, it's going to show. So the principal should be able to articulate your school-based gaps. You should be able to articulate the district vision. You've participated in this, unlike everybody else hasn't, but you sat in this, or most of the principals did, a couple APs did. But having said that, you do also want to honor the roles of the school-based experts, and you want to engage them. a lot of the training that's coming up, you're going to see some specific ways in which we do engage those other folks. And you may want to break some of the other parts up in that way. I think there is power in doing this as a whole group so the whole faculty gets the same message. Other questions? Okay. So that's going to take us to objective number 2, which is around PBIS. Okay? So different schools have different levels of implementation with PBIS in our district. We have schools that are positive behavior intervention support schools of merit that are gold. They have banners that hang in their front windows of their school. And then we have other schools who perhaps went to the training at the Pasadena Community Church in the summer of 2010, like I did, and maybe they haven't done anything with it since. Okay? I can tell you, since I visit all types and levels of schools, our elementary schools are far, far ahead of our secondary schools in terms of PBIS implementation. There's some good reasons for that as well. But certainly, where you are on the PBIS spectrum of implementation will help to dictate how you do this particular part. Okay? So just know that as we roll through it quickly, you may want to do things a little bit differently depending on your school site. So if your school, if we asked 15 teachers at the school, what are the guidelines for success at your school? And the people looked at you like, what's a guideline for success? Then you probably want to spend a little bit of time talking about the guidelines for success. All right? You may want to spend time talking about benchmarks for quality, which is the annual little inventory that you do around that. So it's up to you how you do that part, but we have some easy ways to introduce it from a basic standpoint. In addition to that, doesn't matter what your school is and how deep you are in implementation, you will have new staff members, you'll have folks that are there for the first time, so you want to make sure that everybody has a chance for some sort of extension activity after this. Okay? So what is PBIS? PBIS is the use of evidence-based practices rooted in applied behavioral analysis that are scaled for social importance. And you run through this. This is one of the sections where in the facilitator's guide there's quite a few notes. And I would suggest to you to perhaps read those sort of verbatim. Okay? If you want to use your slide for a little more adult interaction, you can certainly bold or underline some words like I did here. You can color them to have the staff read them so it's not just you as the facilitator reading to everybody, but to get the group engaged. All right? But you're going to introduce PBIS and talk about the basics of it. And then you're going to show a quick little video about PBIS. And if you tried to run this on the slideshow, it may not have worked in the embedded, so we'll send it to you as a link as well. And it is just about 2 minutes long, so let's take a look. All right, so this video is a free video on YouTube, but it does a pretty good job of explaining just the basic components of PBIS and what it is. But at the very end, I think the last 15 seconds is like a commercial for this person. So you'll want to stop it at this point. If you show the rest of it, it's not inappropriate or harmful. It's just sort of odd as to why we're showing this video to the whole school. So it's just this person who talks about they can help you with PBIS. So the idea is that you give this brief overview of PBIS before we get into this intersection of culturally relevant PBIS. And a strong message that you'll want to send on this slide or this video is that behaviors must be taught and reinforced. All right? And so one of the questions you sort of want to just plant at this point in the minds of our staff is, when do we teach our behaviors? If you go back to that set of expectations for teachers, the first bullet is participate and teach those Tier 1 school-wide behaviors. So how do we do that? They're going to have a chance to kind of think about that later on, but we want to make sure as we exit the video that we capture this idea of behaviors must be taught and reinforced in order to get the desired effect. So that's going to take us back to the participant handout, because this slide is difficult to kind of read from a distance. And in the participant handouts, there's a number of pieces of information about PBIS. In fact, the first slide that we sort of read together, or I suggested you read with your staff, those notes are in the upper left-hand corner of that page. And then this slide, which kind of gives the theory behind PBIS and how it leads to outcomes, is also there. So again, there's a lot of information here, and you may want to, for the sake of adult learning, do a couple different things. You certainly could ask staff to read this handout first and just underline anything of interest to them. You could have someone come up and discuss it. This would be a great time for your PBIS coordinator, to the point that Brett made earlier. How do I engage the other people in this? This is a great time to involve them. But at a high level, you want to share this idea of systems, data, and practices and how they lead to outcomes. And so you have sort of definitions for those, right? So what data, what information is needed to improve decision making? How do we look at our behavior? Not just school-wide referral behavior, but how do we look at individual classrooms, right? What are the things that annoy us as teachers? How do we kind of study that data to think about how we can correct it? What are those practices? What students experience to support the learning and improvement of their academic and behavior success? And then what systems do we have around this? All those things lead to outcomes. All right, as these things interact, they lead to outcomes, which is the behaviors that we have in our school. There's also a little checklist over here of what PBIS is not on this handout. That's up to you how you want to use that. But a common idea is that sometimes with PBIS we feel like we have to have this constant physical reward. That is not the case, right? We don't need to have this intricate, crazy token economy, although you can do that if you want. It can just be simply those verbal pieces of positive reinforcement. So the parts around the outside of the circle, which you see on here, lead us to this next slide, which is going to talk to us about PBIS is not fully implemented until it is culturally responsive. And this may be a time where you want to have, for processing purposes, turn and talk. What does that mean? Have the person next to you share. What does that mean? What does it mean if it's not fully implemented, if it's not culturally responsive? And so from just some talking points for yourself, in our elementary schools, anybody can blurt this out, what is the dominant gender of our teachers? Female, right? And so it's likely that on most school staffs, the PBIS behavior team is comprised entirely of females, right? And so most of the students with infractions are what? Males, okay? So we have females making rules for males. The female rules of what they want in their room may not always mesh with the physical needs of boys, all right? Boys are active. They want to get around. They want to talk. They want to touch. They want to do certain things, right? So we're not suggesting that females aren't capable of making rules for boys. They certainly are, and they've been doing it for generations. But we also want to say that we need to consider the needs of boys to make it culture responsive. And the same goes then to any other subgroup, right? If we have students with disabilities or 504 plans that have specific things that cause them to act in a certain way or needs but yet our rules prohibit their success, we need to know that. We're not going to have a successful system if those rules prohibit the success. So it doesn't mean we abandon the rules. It means we need to adapt to make sure that they meet the needs of each and every student. So we have to know what those needs are, and then we have to meet them. We don't lower the expectations, but we make sure we understand them. So culturally responsive PBIS, equity must be deliberately planned for systems improvement. I want to say that again. Equity must be deliberately planned for systems improvement. Achieving equity is not going to happen by accident. You have to plan for it. Okay? So in this particular case, cultural responsiveness within a PBIS system includes 5 core components. I'll get to you in 1 second, Brent. All right, so those 5 core components are listed on the screen, and they are identity, voice, supportive environment, situational appropriateness, and data for equity on the next page. So you can use any just to talk to the staff, but situational appropriateness. Are there things that would be situationally appropriate in art class that would not be appropriate in reading circle time? Yes, right? Are there things that are situationally appropriate during recess that would not be appropriate when we're sitting down to eat lunch? Yes, right? So we need to kind of distinguish situational appropriateness, right? And the same goes for all 5 of these things. So that's going to lead us to an activity to engage in these 5 characteristics of culturally responsive PBIS. And the big picture here is we're trying to set a mindset as our school develops our behavior system for this year. We need to embed these components. And most schools, we have one new school this year, so they're creating a new one, but most schools are what? Using last year's and adapting it. And that's fine, but then take last year's with this lens and see where those gaps are. Okay? So we're going to engage in this activity briefly. We're not going to do the whole activity, but I want you to experience it the same way your staff will experience it in just a second. But we had a question, Brent?
Kevin, would you mind going back to the previous slide?
Sure.
My good friend Kim Untitled knows you have to begin with the end in mind. So I'm concerned about one thing, the story you told about 2010 and I guess the introduction of...
Yeah, I wouldn't share that story with your school. All right, I was just trying to, number 1, lighten the room up, but 2, make the point that everybody's in a different place.
You know I mean this with all due respect. I think the vast majority of my colleagues wouldn't know what PBIS stands for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that knowing this question is so powerful, it's so important in addressing institutionalized racism, all the real issues we have to deal with every day. How much license do we have when we go back to the overview / introduction of PBIS?
Yeah.
You know, I almost want to just have them, before I show them the slide, before I do a reading and lose a lot of people, I almost want to let them know, look, I want you to look for one thing or 2 things that are important to you about PBIS. I want to treat it like an introduction, because if I can't acknowledge and meet them where they are, I can't have them engage with this really deeply important question.
Sure.
I just want to make sure
You have a ton of latitude. So one of the things as we wrap it up at the end, we'll talk about is really this is about 2 hours worth of activities, but it's a 3-hour training because we know that some schools are going to have to do that. Some schools are going to want to spend a lot more time in this process actually passing out the guidelines for success that your school has in theory and dissecting them and talking about them. There's probably going to be a lot of follow-up to this as well.
I'm glad you said that. Can I also follow up then? Because same with restorative practice.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the things, if I were the superintendent, I would direct all principals to do in preschool is acknowledge that there might be gaps. You know, we're talking about gaps in student knowledge.
Yeah.
But what about gaps in knowledge?
Absolutely.
I almost feel like we have to acknowledge that there are going to be gaps in people's understanding of restorative practice. And I appreciate that we have perhaps maybe an extra hour where, if nothing else, we could say to our faculty to do a turn and talk, what might be safely, what might be some things about restorative practice, what questions might people have. I don't want to assume that everybody in the district now is like an expert on restorative practice simply because we're folding it under this thing called, you know.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
So go back to these bullets, and I was making a joke, but I really wasn't. Most teachers, most principals, most whoever who have been through the initial training are going to say, oh yeah, I know that, I'm doing it, right? But we all know that doing it is from 0 to 100, right? And some are at 2 and some are at 92.
And I was just thinking that could help anyone, especially principals, drive possible professional development throughout the year that's site-based.
Correct.
Meeting the actual needs of people. Say, hey, let's look at, informal conferencing. Let's look at affective statements and affective questions. Everybody's going to say they remember from last year, but no one.
How much? Correct. And so I hate to keep saying when we wrap up, but there's an activity that we'll do that actually calls for that PD. What PD do you want? So that the SBLT and leadership teams can focus on that particular training. Yep. Okay, so we're going to engage in the activity, and you're going to do this with your staff, and probably most of your staffs are going to be this size. So you have a handout that explains this activity. It's this Equity with Excellence 5 Corners activity. And so in here, now those of you who were a little bit early know that we moved to this room. We were downstairs, so I had this very well organized in numerical order. Now I can't tell you where any of the posters are, so we're just going to figure this out together. But here's the deal. We're going to go into groups of 5. All right, so we're going to number off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you are going to, when I tell you to move, go with something to write with and your participant handouts. Okay, so those are the 2 things that you need when you move. You don't need the facilitator's guide. You don't need the handout activity description. You'll figure that out on your own. So we're going to number from 1 to 5. And we actually have 10 posters in the room because the number of people that we have is too many to be around one poster, right? You want about maybe 4 or 5 people around one poster. So if you have a really large school, you may want 3 sets of posters, okay? So the posters are labeled with the 5 core elements, starting with identity and going forth from there. We have identity, voice, supportive environment, situational appropriateness, and then data for equity. And I have at the bottom of each one a number. So you can see on that one it says 1 down in the corner. I think that one way in the back says 3. That one back there says 2. So you're going to find one of your posters. So if you're number 1, there's 2 number 1 posters in this room somewhere. All right, if we hung them all back up. If you're number 2, there's 2. If you're number 3, there's 3. I don't care which one you go to. You can go to either one. If you see that there's too many people at one, go to the other one. Okay? When you're there, you and your team are going to read your section. Okay? So if you are identity, you are going to read and review your group's component. Okay? And while you're reading, you're thinking to yourself, if we are implementing PBIS at our school and we're considering the culturally responsive part of PBIS around identity and the identity of all students and staff, what's sort of the ideal state of things that we would do in order to make that happen? And who would be doing those things? So what would the administration need to do? What would the SBLT or sort of the leaders, those leaders around the school? And then what does every teacher need to do around that particular characteristic? So you're not identifying the current state of affairs in your school. You're identifying sort of the ideal state. Okay? So your team is going to go to the poster and armed with something to write with, you're going to fill that poster in. Okay? So we're going to number off and everybody's going to go.
1, 2,
3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 5. 1, 2, 3,
4,
5. 1, 2, 3, 4,
5.
3, 4, 5. 1,
2, 3,
4, 5.
1,
2, 3,
4.
5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3,
5. 1.
2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 5.
1, 2,
3, 4, 5.
All right, that's everybody. Find one of your posters armed with your handout. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There should be 2 of each. We're not going to do the whole activity. I'm just going to introduce it to you. So I give you about 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I need to go. I have your girl coming to our school for our elevating
Yes, you do. 10 o'clock.
That's Leanna, right?
Yeah, Leanna Eisen, and then Jennifer will be there too. She already stepped out to go down there.
All right. The AVID CRT training is phenomenal.
It's really good.
I actually attended an AVID CRT training at Summer Institute, and then I attended the one this summer. I'm trying to get other teachers to get behind that. It wasn't effective, so I want to offer that. I talked to Jane Harris about offering the training on Saturdays.
Yeah.
So I shot her a quick email just to see if we can do that again during the first 9 weeks of school, just offer Saturday trainings. So I'm gonna put that out there to our staff. That's why I asked about it.
Yeah. We have the training schedule for the first semester, so just send it out. And we do, we have it on some Saturdays, we have it nights, whatever Thanksgiving.
See if we can get over to Gibbs High School.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna scoot out of here.
All right.
Thank you very much.
You got it. So remember, once you read your section, you're looking for the ideal state of actions to achieve that particular trait around CR PBIS. Ideal actions. Yep, you can write it right on there.
Going good?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how the volume is, but it's going good. I said I don't know how the volume is, but it's going good.
No, we killed it in the house.
Oh, okay.
Because we're like a couple numbers off of the actual frequency.
Got it.
So it's picking you up and not picking you up.
Okay.
So I was finally like, you know what, we're just going to kill it.
All right.
Because it's just too annoying. It's fine on the recording, it's clean.
Okay.
It was just in here.
Got it.
I thought it was just distracting.
Must be that it's close.
It's probably close.
It's not the same.
And I'm assuming it's under here, but they have a board meeting today, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
So I figured you can be loud. You're
Oh, yeah.
you're a teacher.
I got this.
How much closer was to 9:30? We were under the truck from all that stuff yesterday.
I'm guessing.
So probably like 10 o'clock.
Yeah, 10, 15, 20 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
I mean, I don't have to keep going until you come back, do I?
No, you can stop anytime you
Okay.
want.
All right, yeah, I should be done in 20 minutes. Okay. Oh, I got you. Okay, let me stop you where you are for 1 second. The facilitator's guide, if you read ahead, and I purposefully didn't give you this instruction first because I wanted you to experience what it would be like without that instruction. It can be a little bit sort of like, what are we supposed to write? I heard what he said, but I'm just not exactly sure. So in the facilitator's guide, it says, be sure to iterate and then reiterate. That poster should address instructional practices, restorative practices, discipline practices, and then it says, etc., related to PBIS. Okay? So with that lens now, instructional, restorative, discipline, go back and write a few more things on your poster. Go ahead. All right, I'm going to call you back together again. I told you we weren't going to do the whole activity. I just wanted you to stand up, get a sense of what it was like. So come on back to your seats. We're going to process. I'm going to give you some hints to make sure it's a success. Come on back. Okay, so you probably felt a little bit, hey, what am I supposed to write when I first got up there? But when I gave you the lens of instructional, restorative practices, discipline practices, it got a little bit easier to say, okay, if I'm talking about identity and I'm looking at an instructional practice, when I give students something to read, am I giving an opportunity for students to see themselves in that reading, right? I may not be able to do that literally in every text, but I ought to vary those texts over time so that every student in my room sees themselves in what they're reading, right? And when I talk about voice, the same thing. As an instructional practice, we know, or even in restorative practices, as we use a talking piece, we do that because we want equity of voice, right? So if I'm thinking instructionally, how am I doing this instructionally and honoring the voice of everyone in my room, right? If I'm talking about that from a leadership capacity, how am I allowing the voice of all the stakeholders to come across, right? Not just teachers, but parents. How have I engaged with parents of kids who typically get referrals? And in what way are we getting input from them on their experience with school? And by the way, the summertime and the start of the year is a really good time to get that feedback. Not in the middle of the year. All right? You'll get feedback, but it's not going to perhaps be as helpful as you could get now. All right? So connecting it to instructional, restorative, and discipline practices allows us to see in 3 buckets over 5 categories here how we do this. Now, really, really important how you debrief this. So go to your packet and take a look. There's a spot on the back. If you were the Data with Equity team, you notice this. There's a spot on the back for participants to debrief this activity. So in the handout, it actually says about 15 minutes to allow the groups to do this work. You want to make sure you do a really good explanation on the front end so you get some good characteristics. Now it comes to how do we debrief. So really two main ways that you can debrief. You can do it first, or one way would be having groups share out. So they stay at their poster, you identify someone to speak, and they share out. All right, we're all kind of familiar with that. Second way you could do it, alternatively, is a gallery walk, right? I could go from poster to poster to poster and rotate every 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever the appropriate time is and have people view what others wrote there. Both have positives, both have negatives, all right? In both cases, you should be using this sheet down here for teachers and staff to make notes of things that resonate with them, all right? So practices that I can use in my classroom. Oh, I really like that one, right? Let me go back and take a look at the text in my classroom and look and compare it to the students that I have and see if they can see themselves in the text, okay? So the notes can be taken there whether it's verbally or through the gallery walk. So the positive about the verbal one is that you as the facilitator or facilitators can help to identify, clarify, focus your school, things that may be in your school improvement plan and sort of emphasize certain things, right? You can really dig into those things. The negative is it can take forever, right? If you have 15 posters, oh, right? And after poster number 6, it's like they're saying the same thing, right? So you have to balance that. And you don't want to sort of cheapen the work of group 13 because they were last, right? So you got to balance that. The gallery walk part, yes, it's quicker. It also allows participants to sort of work at their own speed a little bit, but you have no chance to clarify misconceptions. So somebody could have written something on there that maybe isn't something you want to focus on, and yet people are writing it down as if it's a great idea, all right? So you have to balance. So here's perhaps somewhere in the middle that you can be successful. Earlier I mentioned a great time to engage those school-based experts. This is a great time to engage the school-based experts in this way. Have a school-based expert at each poster, and of course you're going to meet with this team ahead of time to let them know, hey listen, Casey, you're going to be the expert on supportive environment, right? You're our, one of our equity champions. You're familiar with this work. I want you to read this over. Think of some things that are there, so if the group is struggling, you can help prompt them. And then when we share out, I want you to only share, you know, the 1 or 2 most impactful things. So you're honoring the folks who are doing the work for you by getting them involved, and you're also sort of controlling the way that it's shared out. All right, so they could do that, and you could do that either in a whole group share out or a gallery walk. So certainly your assistant principals should be involved in that. Your restorative practices trainer should be involved. Your equity champion should be involved. Your PBIS coordinator should be involved. And then you can kind of determine after that how many posters do we need and how many slots, right? But you shouldn't just leave that up to chance and hope that people get something good out of it, right? You should have people there to facilitate those conversations that are sort of ingrained in the work already, all right? So it's a good activity because it gets people up and moving, right? It gets them thinking about it. And then as you process and debrief, you're asking them at the bottom to identify a practice, one practice, that they can implement from the first day of school. There's actually going to be 2 parts in this, one here and then one in the next activity, where you're asking them to identify something that they heard that they like, okay? And certainly from 5 different areas of culturally relevant PBIS, there should be a place in which someone gets and says, wow, that's a really good idea, right? Whether it's brand new, I've never heard it before, or I'm just being reminded of it, I can put that in and I can use it right away, all right? It's also a great point if people are saying, well, I don't even know what that means, right? Is a good spot to kind of do a check-in where, oh, that's something we need to follow up on with PD later on, okay? So that's the introduction to PBIS with a culturally responsive lens. Took a little bit of time to do. It's going to take a little bit of time for you. This section is much longer than the first 2 parts. And it takes us to the intersection of restorative practices and PBIS. So undoubtedly, the folks at your school, as we discussed earlier, are going to remember that last year they engaged in restorative practices training at a bunch of different levels, right? And so folks are naturally going to say, well, is this PBIS new? I thought we were doing restorative practices. How do these things go together? So this slide is designed for folks to sort of say, how do we set the stage for both of these working in concert with each other? And the answer, for those of you who are very familiar with both, is they both emphasize prevention. They both emphasize positive responses to problem behavior. They both emphasize creating a culture at your school that is the foundation for success, right? So these are not things working in opposition to each other, but they're certainly things that work together. They both shift the focus from punishment and exclusion to teaching by reinforcing positive behaviors and encouraging accountability. Do they take away consequences from students? Neither one does, right? But they do emphasize preventative, proactive. They emphasize the teaching of those behaviors and accountability. And value is placed on student and staff engagement and involvement in both processes. So the restorative practices piece is going to come right in here, although we've touched it several times, and it's going to lead us to an explanation of how our district and how your school, by the way, has already doing this last year and the year before. How do we measure our implementation of these initiatives? And so we do so using this Tier 1 PBIS walkthrough with restorative practices. This is going to be a new document to teachers, but it's not a new document to school administrators and the SBLT. You've been using this in the past. In fact, if you ever had an ISM at your school and the MTSS coach came, they did this document, right? They actually filled this in for you and gave you the results. So this is how we will measure this PBIS implementation and how it interacts with restorative practices. So it's in the handout, it's in the guide. You're going to share it with them. You'll see that there's 7 sections, and you're going to start out by introducing it to teachers by just getting them to do a little text marking on their own. So they're going to start, we've identified these text marking symbols for you to use. If you have text marking things that you do as a school, I would encourage you to change those and use yours, all right? But these are ones that you can use. So put a little smiley face for anything that's an aha as it relates to PBIS and restorative practices. If it's a question, I don't know what this means, put a question mark. If it's a support that might be needed, oh, this is nice, but we're not doing this yet, that would be a plus. And then a gap is a gap in implementation, could be a support or a gap depending on how it's read. So you're going to ask teachers to go through this on their own and just mark it up. Take a couple of minutes to mark it up, and then take a couple of minutes, the next slide, to turn and talk with a partner. What do you see? What questions do you have? Are they similar to the questions I have? What are the gaps at our school? Things like that, all right? Not trying to get teachers to be an expert in this whole tool, just like we're not trying to get them to be an expert in the district-wide data of BTG. We're just trying to give a good preview of how do we measure this at our school. So after that, and again, you can choose how you want to share this out. You may entertain questions, but I would suggest not, because you're going to engage in classroom in section 5, which is about the classroom, which is near and dear to teachers. So if you flip to the very last page of the handout, section 5 of that PBIS walkthrough document is sort of blown up. All right, so you take it out and it's sort of blown up here. So you're going to ask teachers to do a little activity where they sort of rate themselves in a self-assessment. And so item 1, there is evidence that Tier 1 expectations are defined for the classroom using classroom rules, procedures, and routines, and these are posted and taught regularly. So you're going to ask teachers, think about your classroom, think about the room that you're setting up. Are there rule posters, evident or not evident? If not, how can I start to do that? Are there lesson plans connected with instructional activities? This is the teaching part of PBIS. Do I teach the things that I expect of my students? And do I do it beyond the first day? Right? When I pass out the syllabus and say, here are the rules, learn them, sign it, and hand it in. Okay? And then do I have visual prompts? So if someone is not doing what I want, do I have a way of using proximity control? Do I remind them with some sort of visual? Hey, remember, we're going to ask 2 other people before we raise our hand, or whatever the thing is. Okay? And then same thing going through the whole piece of this. So item 4 is highlighted up here because that's the area of restorative practices, and you're going to want to call that out separately. So item 4 at the bottom, there is evidence that the strategies of the restorative practice continuum are used both proactively and responsively. Now again, this is a self-assessment. Everyone rates themselves higher on self-assessments, okay? But we're setting the stage of the clear expectations of how we would measure the effectiveness of this at our school. How this document is used at your school, the larger one, is up to your SBLT. That's one of the things that they have to determine if we are going to get equity with excellence for all at our school, how do we want to measure this, right? Do I want to ask Michelle and I, hey, we're partner teachers, we're in the same hall. Would you mind just sort of going through my room and seeing if you see any of these evidences? I'll go through your room, right? Or perhaps as a department, we may sit down and discuss what are the things that we're doing, or as a grade level. What do you do for visual clues that's different than what I do, right? So however you choose to use it as a school is fine, but if we're implementing PBIS and we're implementing restorative practices, this is a way that we measure it, and as a district, it's the tool that we use. And by the way, it's vetted by both Restorative Practices Institute and the Florida PBIS project. All right? We didn't just make it up. So you give them some time to do the practices, and then you ask them to identify what's one practice that you can increase or improve usage from the first day of school. So I said there'd be 2 places to do this. The first was on this bigger activity, the debrief, what's something, a strategy I can use right away. And now we're connecting to this document, what's a strategy or a practice that I can improve upon from the first day of school. And because we're doing this early enough, right, we can build it into how we teach students as we start. So they'll turn, they'll talk again. What areas are similar? What areas are different? What did you write? What did I write? What's evident? What's not evident? And then what's your practice that you want to do? What's the practice that I want to do? How are they similar? How are they not similar? Okay? A couple different ways, too, to process this. You could perhaps ask people to write it on a sticky note, right? And then bring those sticky notes back out later. Hey, Christina, you said you were going to try this practice this year. How's that going, right? So sometimes capturing it and doing a little accountability piece to it helps, right? Just as it does with students. Doesn't mean you use it against them later on. You said you were going to do this and now you're not doing it, right? But just this is something you said you wanted to do. We're a month into school. How's that going? Okay? Yeah.
So people are very familiar with the Marzano big picture instrument, but how can we guard against the tendency for suddenly there's this expectation now that everybody has a rule poster or they understand what a token economy is. Like, how do we guard against like this becoming?
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that we do it is we say that, this is not part of the Marzano instrument, right? There's nothing about token economy on the Marzano instrument. The Marzano instrument calls for a classroom climate that's conducive to building students' knowledge to get the target, right? Yeah. So if you're doing those things, these are ways to do it. What you would do for a token economy in kindergarten is very different than what you would do in AP government, right? I mean, we're talking different things. We're not trying, and this is the same with the self-audit. That's why I said I don't like the word audit. And we purposely, because we chose assessment here, it's not a gotcha on these things. It's just simply if we're building that foundation, these are the good components that make it up. Research-based components, not Pinellas County Schools things, but what the International Institute of Restorative Practices and what the Florida PBIS and National PBIS Project have as these strong foundations. So that's why it's critical that the school teams decide how they want to use these so that they don't become that way. Yeah. So there's another slide in here that was a placeholder, this Equity with Excellence video. We weren't sure where we were going to show it. We showed it earlier. So you can delete this one or you can show it again if you want to. It's up to you. And that's going to take us back to, as a wrap-up, this idea of equity with excellence for all. So you're going to take everybody back here, and we're going to say it out loud again. Say it with me. The academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of each and every student are known and met. And so at this point, you've engaged the staff in a lot of different activities. And as I've mentioned multiple times, we have to sort of think about what's the context for our school? Because every school is going to be in a different place in all of these initiatives. So we really have to think about it. Some of our transformation zone schools are so far along in their equity training, they leave us in the dust, right? So their work around some of this is going to be very different than some of our other schools. So you have to contextualize all the different activities to your school. But it's going to take us to sort of 2 closing activities, all right? The first is a closing circle. And as I mentioned earlier, this is where we definitely want to do these in smaller circles. So again, I would rely on those school-based experts that we identified earlier to host some of these circles. Because this is one of the circles with equity of voice where we do want every person to speak. Okay? So you want a talking piece and you want every person to speak. And so you need to figure out how many circles do I want, do I want 8 people in a circle? Do I want 12? You have to figure that out on your own. Okay? And so you're going to ask 2 questions for that closing circle that you would just leave up on the screen. So what excites you regarding equity with excellence for all? And what makes you nervous or uneasy about what we've discussed today? And just like any other circle, it's really up to the facilitator. You can have folks state both at the same time. You can do the first prompt first. You can ask them. You can speak to either one, right? It's sort of up to the facilitator. So it's not this, take the ball, pass it to the right, tell me what your answer is to the first question, right? We want to build this into an authentic circle that really gets to people's hearts about what excites me about this? Why am I excited to say we're going to meet the needs of each and every student? Or what makes me a little nervous? You know, I've not really seen this PBIS walkthrough document before. It's sort of new to me. I need to learn more about that, okay? So you'll do that in concentric circles for our math folks, all right? And then finally, you'll do this idea of a ticket out the door. And somewhere in here, there it is. It's on the door. How about that? So on the door is a poster that takes the 6 bullets from the teacher expectation page and lists them right here, right? And it lists them there, and then it has the titles above each one: equity mindset, culturally relevant teaching, restorative practices, and PBIS. And then using some little stickers, you're going to give your teachers 2 stickers and say, on your way out the door, I'd like you to put your 2 stickers in places where you feel either you personally or our school as a whole could benefit from more training. All right? And so after every teacher walks out, we have a quick consensogram of what are the areas that we need more training in. And so if we see 1 million dots in equity mindset, but none in culturally relevant teaching, that's the opinion of the staff at the end of today of where we think we need to go next. All right? And then reminding you back up here, it's the goal of leadership to figure out what's the next training we're going to do. All right? And there's a whole host of ones that you have access to that you worked on this summer around that. Okay? So you have to kind of figure that out, but that consensogram gives you an idea. The facilitator's guide asks you to take a picture of that and bring the poster to your first area meeting for our principals, because we want to see what it looks like across the district. All right? So Dr. Hires was here for most of the training this morning. She wants you to bring your poster to the Area 2 meeting so she can see what does Area 2 say they need the most, and then gear training specifically towards that. So that's in the facilitator's notes here at the end. Okay? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to discuss with the folks around you that you came with. What are you thinking about? What questions do you have as it relates to the whole PBIS, RP, Tier 1 walkthrough, all that stuff, or the closing activities? 2 minutes. Go ahead. How's it going?
How much longer do you have?
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, because I told finance they could come do their run through at 10.
Okay.
So I make sure they'd still be able to.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
All right. All right, let me bring us back together. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, I have some questions for you, and it's going to require unison response. Are you ready? Okay, unison response means everyone says yes or no at the same time. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, may you modify the PowerPoint to meet the needs of your school? Yes. May you break it up into chunks and do it throughout preschool? Yes. May you break it into chunks and do it throughout the year? No. No. Are there things that you need to prepare for ahead of time? Yes. Yes. Turn and tell the people next to you what you need to prepare for ahead of time. Go ahead. All right. We bring us back together. I want someone from Midtown tell me, Midtown Academy, what's one thing we need to prepare for ahead of time?
Yeah, the Wordle activity where they type in.
Okay, the Wordle activity. Are we going low tech? Are we going high tech? What platform are we using? Somebody from Dunedin High, tell me something else we need to prepare for.
We got to get the poster ready.
Got to get the poster ready. Okay, so we have really two sets of posters. Yep. So that poster over there, the ticket out the door, is in the email that you'll get sent out. So you'll have that. You just need to poster make it. And if you don't have a poster maker, then somebody needs to write it. These posters you have to make. Okay, and you also have to make the number of sets that you need to get done. Right? All right, somebody from Tarpon Springs Fundamental, tell us something else we need to prepare for.
We were just talking about how we wanted to pace it and where we should the videos and how to connect it to our current guidelines of success.
Absolutely. Okay, so a lot of things in there. One is pacing. Are we doing 3 straight hours? Are we doing a chunk here and a chunk there? Second, how are we connecting it? All right, can't overemphasize that. This is definitely not the district told us to do this, right? Although, yes, it is a district-wide goal of getting a common understanding and expectation, which I think we all would agree is important. You must contextualize this to your school. Everybody's in a different space, so you have to think and plan, how am I going to connect this? Including who are the teachers that are already really good at this, and how can I connect them into this, those school-based experts. The videos, of course, technology, all those other things. Good. We'll do one more from Pinellas Park. What's something else we need to prepare for?
Make sure we identify all the participants and have them well versed in what their piece is going to be.
Great. All right, so I'm going to reach out to my school-based experts, make sure that they get this. You might have to do this ahead of time, right, with them so they understand it. So there's probably about 10 more things you need to prepare for. Those are just a couple, all right, to make sure that you've got something. Brant?
I would just say that preparing to properly frame all this is, I don't know, for me, the most important thing, taking extra time to frame all this ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the very beginning, I did a little bit of that with these objectives, right? I've referred back to them multiple times. If you've noticed, I'm pointing. That's a visual cue, right? But the contextual part of your school and how you want to do that, and as I've mentioned multiple times, I hope you're doing other things around school improvement, your behavior data, academic data, that this is just a lead into, right? This is just the start of those conversations. I'll be around the rest of the morning, or not the rest of the morning, but for a little while, to answer questions. If you need additional handouts, they're there. We'll be sending out an email with all of the resources, the links, all those things this week so that you have it all. And you'll see yourselves a little bit on camera. If you sat in the center, the back of your head, in case a school wasn't able to come, they'll get to see this one. All right? Thanks, guys.